Walking is one of the healthiest habits you can build after 60, and yet some people walk every single day and still deal with cold feet by evening. Ankles that look a little more swollen than they used to, or legs that feel heavy long before bedtime. If that sounds familiar, the problem usually isn't that you're not walking enough. It's that walking on its own doesn't ask certain muscles and movement patterns to do their part. There's a reason for that, and it comes down to a mechanism most people have never had explained to them in plain language. Once you understand it, 5 specific movements start to make a lot more sense, and the last one on this list tends to be the one that surprises people the most because it's the one that ties everything else together. I'm Dr. Robert Vance, and for years I've sat with older adults who describe almost this exact pattern. They're not sedentary. Many of them are proud of how consistent they've stayed with walking, and they should be. But consistency in one type of movement doesn't automatically cover every function your legs are responsible for. And that gap is worth understanding rather than ignoring. Let me say clearly, right at the start, that nothing in this video is meant to discourage you from walking. Keep walking. It's genuinely good for your heart, your mood, your joints, and yes, your circulation too, in a general sense. What I want to add today is context around why walking alone sometimes isn't the full picture for leg symptoms specifically, and what else may help fill that gap for some people, depending on what's actually causing their symptoms. And that last part matters more than people realize. Cold feet, swollen ankles, heavy legs by evening, these symptoms can come from several different places. Sometimes it relates to how efficiently blood is returning from your legs back up to your heart. Sometimes it's connected to how much time is spent sitting during the day. Sometimes other health conditions play a role entirely separate from what we're discussing here. I can't tell you through a video which of those applies to you specifically, and I wouldn't try to. What I can do is explain one piece of this that doesn't get talked about nearly enough and give you practical tools that may help, while encouraging you to loop in your own doctor if these symptoms are new, worsening, or concerning to you. Here's the piece most people have never had explained clearly. Your heart does the heavy lifting of pumping blood down into your legs, and gravity helps that part along easily enough. The harder job is the return trip, getting blood from your feet and lower legs all the way back up to your chest, moving against gravity the entire way. Your body has a clever built-in assistant for that job, and it lives in your calf muscles. Every time your calf contracts and then relaxes, it squeezes the veins running through that muscle, and that squeezing motion helps push blood upward through a series of one-way valves. Some people nickname this the calf muscle pump, and every so often you'll hear it called a kind of second heart. I want to be precise about that phrase because it's not a literal second heart. It has no chambers. It doesn't beat on its own. It's simply a useful way to picture what's happening, a rhythmic assist mechanism tucked into your lower legs. Now think about what a normal walk actually does to your calf muscles. It's a repeated, fairly narrow motion, the same basic contraction over and over at a steady pace. That's genuinely useful, and it's part of why walking supports circulation in a general sense. But it doesn't ask your calf to work through its full range with intention. It doesn't train the kind of deliberate, sustained contraction that builds real strength in that pump mechanism. And it barely touches the smaller stabilizing muscles around your ankles and hips that are responsible for balance, the muscles that matter most in moments like stepping onto an uneven curb or catching yourself if your foot catches on something. Let me introduce you to someone who represents a pattern I've seen many times over the years. I want to be upfront that this isn't one specific patient, but a composite picture, the kind of story a lot of you watching will probably recognize pieces of. We'll call her Eleanor. Eleanor is 71, widowed 6 years ago, and has made a point of staying active, partly because she promised herself she would, and partly because she genuinely enjoys her morning routine. Most days, she walks about 30 minutes through her neighborhood with a close friend, rain or shine, and she considers that walk one of the best parts of her day. But over the last year or so, Eleanor started noticing something that bothered her more than she let on to her walking partner. By late afternoon, her legs felt unusually heavy, almost like she'd been standing for hours, even on days she'd mostly been sitting. Her feet were cold at night regardless of the season, and she'd started keeping thicker socks by her bed. And on a few occasions, stepping off a curb or over an uneven patch of sidewalk, she'd felt a flash of unsteadiness that unsettled her more than it probably should have. She mentioned it to her doctor, who examined her, ran a few basic checks, found nothing urgent, and suggested that alongside her walks, some targeted lower leg strengthening and balance work might be worth trying. Eleanor, like most people hearing that for the first time, wasn't entirely sure what it should look like in practice. That's exactly what we're covering today, and we'll circle back to Eleanor as we go. Let's move through the 5 movements, counting down, starting with the gentlest and building toward the one I consider the real payoff of this entire video. Number 5 is where I ask almost everyone to begin, regardless of current fitness level, because it's accessible even to someone who has trouble standing for long periods, and it directly engages that calf pump mechanism we just talked about. This is the ankle pump. You can do this seated in any chair or lying down if that's more comfortable. Point your toes away from you like pressing a gas pedal, then flex them back toward your shins as far as comfortably possible. That full cycle is 1 repetition. It looks small, almost too simple to matter, but that up and down motion directly contracts and releases the calf muscles, engaging the exact pump mechanism responsible for helping blood move upward. Aim for around 15 to 20 slow, controlled repetitions, and consider doing a set in the morning, another in the afternoon, and another in the evening, particularly on days involving longer stretches of sitting, like a car trip or an afternoon of reading. A common mistake is doing this too fast, turning it into a shallow flicking motion instead of a full, deliberate range of movement. Slow down and actually feel the stretch at both ends of the motion. Mild fatigue in the calf or shin afterward is entirely normal. Sharp pain, a cramp that doesn't release once you stop, or new numbness is not, and if you notice that, it's worth mentioning to your doctor rather than pushing through it. Eleanor started with this one during the evening news, a habit she'd already had of sitting in the same chair every night, so it cost her nothing extra in terms of time. Within a couple of weeks, she mentioned to her doctor that her ankles felt less puffy by bedtime, which isn't guaranteed for everyone and depends heavily on the underlying cause, but it's a pattern I hear often, likely because that steady, repeated pumping action throughout the evening is doing precisely what it's meant to do. Number 4 builds real strength into the picture. This is the seated leg lift. Sitting in a sturdy chair with your back supported, extend one leg out in front of you until it's roughly parallel to the floor. Hold that position for a slow count of 2 or 3, then lower it back down under control. That's 1 repetition on that side, and then you'll switch legs. This movement works the quadriceps along the front of your thigh, along with your hip flexors, and to a smaller degree, the calf as it holds the extended position. Thigh strength matters more than people expect here, because strong thighs take pressure off your knees when standing up from low chairs, support you on stairs, and reduce how much strain your lower legs absorb during long periods of standing. Start with 8 to 10 repetitions per leg, and if a full extension feels like too much initially, a partial lift is perfectly fine while you build toward the full range over time. The most common mistake is using momentum, kicking the leg up quickly rather than lifting with steady control. The benefit lives in that controlled hold, not in how fast or high you can kick. Mild fatigue in the front of the thigh is expected, especially early on. What should make you stop is sharp pain localized inside the knee joint itself, which is different from ordinary muscle fatigue. This is roughly where Eleanor started noticing a change in something she hadn't even mentioned to me directly, getting up out of her car. Her car sits a bit low, and she'd quietly started using the door frame to pull herself up more than she used to. A few weeks into adding these seated leg lifts to her evenings, she told me almost as an aside that she didn't feel like she needed to pull on the door frame anymore. That's not a small thing. That's stronger quadriceps doing exactly what they're built to do. Number 3 moves us to standing, though still with support close by, and it targets that calf pump directly with real resistance behind it. This is the supported calf raise, standing behind a sturdy chair or a kitchen counter, feet roughly hip-width apart. Hold on with both hands and slowly rise up onto the balls of your feet, lifting your heels as high as feels comfortable, then lower back down with control. That's 1 repetition. This is probably the single most direct exercise for the calf pump mechanism because it takes the muscle through a full, deliberate range against your own body weight, something a normal walking stride simply doesn't ask for. Start with 8 to 12 repetitions, keeping your attention on balance and a firm grip on your support surface. The most common mistake is rushing the lowering phase, essentially dropping the heels instead of controlling the descent, when in fact that lowering phase is where much of the actual strengthening work happens. Take roughly a 2 or 3 count on the way down. A mild burning sensation in the calves toward the end of a set is a normal sign of muscle engagement. Sharp pain in the Achilles tendon at the back of the heel, or a calf cramp that grips tightly and doesn't release, is your cue to stop, and if that becomes a repeated issue, it's worth discussing with your doctor. Before we move to the next movement, I want to touch on something Eleanor mentioned that I think a lot of you will relate to. She told me she'd never really thought of her calves as working for anything beyond carrying her weight from point A to point B. It hadn't occurred to her that they had a specific job related to circulation, a job that a normal walking stride only partially fulfills. Once that clicked for her, she said the exercises stopped feeling like an arbitrary chore and started feeling purposeful, like she finally understood what she was actually doing and why. I mention that because understanding the reason behind a movement tends to make people far more consistent with it than simply being told to do it. So if any of this mechanism talk feels a little technical, that's fine. The key takeaway is simple. Your calves have a job beyond walking, and these movements give them a chance to actually do it. Number 2 introduces balance directly, because strength by itself doesn't fully explain steadiness. This is the supported single leg stance. Standing next to a stable countertop, hold on lightly with one or both hands, then shift your weight and lift one foot slightly off the floor, balancing on the standing leg. Hold for as long as feels controlled, even if that's only 5 to 10 seconds at first, building up gradually over time. This trains the small stabilizing muscles around your ankle, knee, and hip on the standing leg, muscles a normal walking stride barely touches, since walking is essentially a quick sequence of weight transfers rather than sustained single leg holds. Better stability here can matter in moments most people never think about until they need it. Catching yourself on an uneven patch of ground, staying steady reaching into a high cabinet, or stepping confidently off a curb. Keep your support hand in light contact rather than gripping hard and leaning your weight into it. The goal is for your standing leg to genuinely do the balancing work with the hand there only as a safety net. If you find yourself needing to grip tightly just to stay upright, that's a sign to spend more time building strength and confidence with the earlier movements before progressing here. And that's a completely normal part of the process. This is the movement that meant the most to Eleanor, and I want to share why. She has a young grandson who loves being chased around the backyard, and there was a specific afternoon, maybe a year and a half ago, when she felt a genuine flash of fear stepping quickly across the uneven grass to catch him before he reached the edge of the patio. Nothing happened. She caught him fine, but that instant of doubt in her own legs stayed with her longer than the moment itself. After weeks of practicing that single leg balance hold along with the rest of the routine, the next time she was out in that same backyard, chasing the same grandson, she told me the doubt simply wasn't there anymore. That kind of change doesn't show up on any chart in a doctor's office, but it matters just as much as anything that does. And now, number 1, the movement that pulls everything together. This is the standing calf raise with a hold at the top, done with lighter support than the supported version once you're genuinely ready for it. Stand near a wall or sturdy surface for balance only, not to bear your weight. Rise onto the balls of your feet the same way as before, but this time pause at the top and hold that raised position for a slow count of 2 to 3 seconds before lowering with control. That brief hold is what separates this from the earlier calf raise. It asks the muscle to sustain a contraction rather than simply move through one, and that sustained demand builds both strength and the kind of endurance that supports everyday tasks, standing at the sink, washing dishes, waiting in a checkout line, reaching for something on a high shelf without shifting your weight awkwardly. Start with 6 to 8 repetitions and only move to this version once the supported calf raise feels stable and comfortable, which might take a couple weeks for some people and longer for others. There's no timeline you're supposed to hit, depending on your balance and any other health conditions you're managing. It may make sense to keep a light hand on a wall or counter indefinitely rather than aiming to eventually do this with no support at all. And there's absolutely nothing wrong with that. The goal was never to perform this unsupported. The goal is simply stronger, more capable legs, whatever form that support takes for you. Eleanor does hers most mornings while her tea steeps, one hand resting lightly on the counter edge. She told me it barely feels like exercise anymore, more like something her body just does now while she waits for the kettle. That's really the goal for all 5 of these movements. Not a demanding new routine, but a handful of minutes folded into a day that's already happening. I want to be honest with you about something because it matters. None of these 5 movements will cure arterial blockages, reverse every form of circulation trouble, or replace medical treatment if you've already been diagnosed with a specific vascular or cardiac condition. What they may do for some people, depending on what's actually causing their symptoms, is support the muscular side of circulation, build strength that reinforces balance, and give that calf pump far more consistent targeted work than a daily walk alone typically provides. That's meaningful, but it's not a miracle, and I wouldn't want to leave you thinking otherwise. Think about how much of your day is spent sitting, because it's usually more than people realize once they actually count it. In the car, at the table, in front of the television, in a favorite chair with a book. A 30-minute walk is wonderful, but it's often surrounded by 6, 8, sometimes 10 hours where your calf muscles are essentially doing nothing at all, and gravity has the fluid in your lower legs largely to itself. That's a big part of why someone can walk every day and still feel heavy legs by evening. The walk isn't failing. It's simply one window in a day that otherwise gives the calf pump very little reason to engage. I also want to gently push back on an assumption I hear constantly, the idea that any leg symptom automatically points to something serious with the heart or arteries. Sometimes it does, which is exactly why ongoing symptoms deserve a real evaluation rather than guesswork from a video. But very often, especially in people who are otherwise healthy and simply getting older, what's happening is more mechanical than anything else. Muscles that aren't specifically challenged lose some pumping efficiency over time. Vein valves can become slightly less effective with age in some people. None of that is an emergency. It's simply part of why a general daily walk sometimes isn't quite enough on its own, and why a handful of targeted minutes can shift how your legs feel by the end of the day. One question I get often is how quickly someone should expect to move through these 5 movements, from ankle pumps all the way to that final standing calf raise with a hold. There's no single right timeline, and I'd be cautious of anyone who tells you there is. Some people, especially those who've stayed fairly active, move through the progression in a couple of weeks. Others, particularly if they're managing joint issues, recovering from a recent illness, or simply newer to structured movement, might spend a month or more on the earlier movements before feeling ready for the later ones. And that's not a slower or lesser path. It's simply the right pace for that person's body. What matters far more than speed is consistency, showing up for a few minutes most days rather than pushing hard for one dramatic session and then not returning to it for 2 weeks. Slow, steady progress tends to hold up better over time than anything rushed, and it's considerably safer too. Let's talk for a moment about what this actually looks like woven into a normal day, because 5 exercises can sound like it requires a gym bag and a scheduled block of time, and it really doesn't. Standing at the stove waiting for water to boil is calf raise time. Sitting in a waiting room before an appointment is ankle pump time. Standing at the bathroom counter brushing your teeth, one hand resting lightly on the edge, is a fine moment for a balance hold. None of this needs to feel like a workout. It needs to feel like a few small habits stitched into a day you're already living. And the payoff tends to show up in places people don't expect. Getting out of a low car seat without needing both hands on the doorframe. Carrying a bag of groceries up a short flight of stairs without your legs feeling shaky by the top step. Reaching into a high cabinet while standing comfortably on one foot instead of gripping the counter with white knuckles. Keeping pace on a longer shopping trip without needing to sit down halfway through. None of these are dramatic headline-grabbing changes. They're the quiet, everyday kind of independence most of us don't think about until it feels a little less certain, and then we notice the moment it comes back. Now, an important distinction, because I don't want anyone applying today's advice to the wrong situation. There's a real difference between the ordinary, chronic heaviness, or mild swelling we've been discussing, and symptoms that call for prompt medical attention. Sudden, severe pain in one leg that comes on quickly rather than gradually. Sudden, significant swelling in one leg that looks noticeably different from the other. A leg or foot that turns unusually pale, blue, cold, or numb, rather than simply cool. Chest pain, sudden, severe shortness of breath. Fainting or feeling like you might. Or a wound on your leg or foot that isn't healing over time. Those are not situations to address with exercise at home. Those call for prompt evaluation by a medical professional, and in the case of sudden severe symptoms, that may mean emergency care. The gradual familiar concerns we've covered today are a different category, but even those are worth mentioning at your next appointment, especially if they're new, worsening, or paired with anything else that concerns you. I'm not trying to alarm you. I'm trying to make sure you know when today's guidance applies and when it's time to call your doctor instead. If any of this sounds like your own evenings, your own cold feet, your own moment of unsteadiness on a curb, I'd like to hear about it. In the comments, tell me which symptom sounds most familiar to you, whether it's the cold feet, the evening swelling, the heaviness, or that flash of unsteadiness, and which of these 5 movements you think you'll try first. I read through these regularly, and hearing what's actually helping real people watching is one of the most useful parts of making this channel. One more thing worth mentioning before we close. A lot of people ask whether they need any special equipment for this, and the honest answer is no. A sturdy chair, a kitchen counter, or a wall is all the support these 5 movements require. You don't need resistance bands, ankle weights, or a gym membership to get started, though some people eventually add light resistance once the basic movements feel comfortable. And that's a conversation to have with a physical therapist if you're interested in progressing further down the line. For now, the goal is simply consistency with what you already have at home. Let's bring it back together. Keep walking. It's a genuinely good habit, and nothing here is meant to talk you out of it. But if your legs are telling you they need something more, something that specifically challenges that calf muscle pump, builds real thigh strength, and trains balance the way an ordinary stroll simply can't, these 5 movements, done consistently, starting with ankle pumps and building toward that final standing calf raise with a hold, may be exactly the missing piece for you. Start wherever makes sense for your body today, not where you think you're supposed to be. If you're managing other health conditions or you're simply unsure which of these fits your situation, that's a good conversation to bring to your doctor or physical therapist who can adjust this specifically for you. As for Eleanor, she still takes her morning walk with her friend, same 30 minutes, same familiar streets, but there's a short list of movements folded into her day around it now. Ankle pumps during the evening news, calf raises while her tea steeps, a balance hold here and there while she waits for something in the kitchen. She told me recently that her legs don't feel like they're working against her by the end of the day anymore. They feel like they're keeping up with her. That's really what independence comes down to in the end. Not something dramatic, just legs that keep pace with the life you actually want. Morning walks with a good friend, afternoons chasing a grandson across the backyard, an ordinary evening standing at the counter without a second thought. And if you're watching this and thinking about a parent, a spouse, or an older friend, rather than yourself, feel free to pass this along to them. Sometimes the person who needs to hear this isn't the one sitting in front of the screen, and a gentle nudge from someone who cares can matter more than any video ever could on its own. If this video gave you a clearer picture of your own legs, I'd appreciate it if you'd hit like and consider subscribing. It genuinely helps this channel reach more people asking the same questions you might be asking right now, and there's more of this kind of practical, honest conversation coming. Take care of those legs. They've carried you this far, and with a little targeted attention, they can keep carrying you exactly where you want to go next, whatever that looks like for you.